Hey guys, it's me, Rohan, GAMSAT tutor and medical student, and today I'm here to talk you guys through the most important approach for Section 2 in the GAMSAT. Section 2 can be and should be the biggest strength you have walking into the GAMSAT later this year, or for some of you guys watching this video after I've published it, maybe even in 2026 or beyond. But approaching Section 2 correctly makes a huge difference. And today what I have for you guys is a really special 30-minute clip from my online courses on Section 2. Now, if you're interested in these courses, there'll be links down in the description below. And for the month of August, as we approach the GAMSAT, I'm having 15% off. The discount code will be in the description below as well. So these courses range from over 8 hours in my sprint course on Section 2 to over 25 hours in the mastery course. And if you get the whole package, Rohan's GAMSAT Blueprint, you get over 80 hours of Section 1, Section 2 content, along with 25 of my best essays, all for a super affordable price. And with the 15% discount, it becomes a no-brainer heading into the last month. So strap yourselves in, get a cup of tea, and enjoy the next 30 minutes as I break down how to approach Section 2.
So that's what I kind of want to draw our attention to for the next little bit, which is section 2 as a test of character. Okay, now what you can see on the screen here is 8 really important qualities, and I want you guys to sort of use these 8 qualities as the backbone or the real foundation for everything that you do in section 2 from here on in. Okay, so you can have a tremendous understanding of sociology, of politics, of economics, of personal philosophy, but if you can't put your ideas together in a way which addresses these qualities and taps into them consistently in your writing, you're not going to score well in section 2. So this is the sort of secret sauce that most people, I think, are missing in their writing. It's what they forget, and this is what I mean when I say that section 2 is not a mere sort of examination of your writing skills, because if you're just mimicking Wikipedia and you've sort of got a PhD in economics and you're writing these really clever essays on economics, but you lack compassion, you lack empathy, openness, emotional intelligence, introspection, clarity, precision, and insight, your essays are not going to score well. The other thing you hopefully will notice with these 8 qualities on the screen is that they're all, not only are they all sort of really important qualities for you guys' writing, but they're all actually super important qualities for any medical professional as well. And it's no coincidence that these end up being the qualities that serve you the best for your GAMSAT writing. Okay, so let's go through each of these qualities, and I'm going to kind of pick on one of you guys at a time, and let's try and break down firstly sort of what we mean by each of these, but also more so how can we embed these qualities into an essay or into a response, a written response. So the first one here is compassion. Okay, and compassion, as I've kind of defined it here, is a sort of examination or a question of how sensitive you are. So again, I'm just going to go based off the completely random order in which you guys appear on my screen. So number 1, Sienna. Um, what in what way could we sort of exemplify? And I know you said you haven't sat the GAMSAT before, so I'd be interested to hear what you have to say here. But in what ways can we reflect um, compassion in our writing?
Um, it's, I guess, how I would imagine you to do it kind of relates to empathy, is kind of considering the topic from all perspectives and not just your own. As a lot of us are
Hmm.
probably in a position of privilege, so when we're faced with a theme, it's easy to have like a really close-minded view of something, but the ability to have compassion for people in different circumstances and then displaying that in your essay by providing multiple examples that would relate to different people, maybe.
Okay, so I think that probably fits into empathy better than compassion,
Yeah.
but absolutely, you hit the nail on the head there in terms of the importance of considering other people's perspectives in your writing, and bearing those in mind. The point you make about privilege is super important, and being cognizant of that at all points is really important. Um, I will say though, and this will kind of become clearer probably next week and the week after when we go through structure and approach to quote interpretation. Um, uh, you don't necessarily want to provide a essay that just taps into everyone's perspective, because then you're just a um, you write an essay that ends up not really saying anything, but rather you just end up broadcasting different perspectives. And again, when we think about the purpose of these essays that we're writing, we're not writing these essays to serve as a a Wikipedia article or just a source of information. We are writing these essays so that ASA can learn something about our character. And ASA doesn't really learn anything about you if you just, again, broadcast everyone else's perspective. So, and that kind of will lead us into our very last quality here, which is insight. But you do still want to have a stance. You want to have your own perspective, but you still want to communicate that in a way which is still respectful and empathetic to other people's perspective. And then there's a number of ways in which you can do that in your writing. And you guys can probably think about a situation where you've had a conversation with someone who you disagree with, but throughout the whole conversation, you feel like they are listening to you, and you feel like, despite the fact that they have their own mindset and perspective on an issue, but they're listening to you and they respect your difference of opinion. And on the other hand, we've all probably had conversations with people that disagree with you, um, and at no point do you feel like you're getting through. At no point do you feel like they're listening to you. You feel like you're talking to a brick wall. Okay, so we want to write our essays in a way where we come across as being empathetic, as being accepting of other people's perspectives, and being cognizant of potential limitations of our own perspectives, which taps in a little bit into um, openness and introspection, but we'll talk about it in a second. But I just want to go back to compassion, which was our first one here. So um, sensitivity is a really important issue. So Aditi, I'll go to you next, just to go a bit deeper on that first one. If I was giving you a essay to write about economic inequality, what types of points might you really want to break down and cover, and what perspectives might you really want to drill into to reflect a more compassionate character via your essay?
I feel like this kind of, I'm not too sure, but it might link in with empathy a bit because it's able to understand other people and consider the fact that because of how privileged each person is, that they all have different experiences, and we should have a internal mental like aspect where we are able to understand. And
Yep.
because of how you are able to, because of how our parents or everyone else around us might be in a different economic state than other people, does not mean that we can consider everyone else to be as understanding as us. And we have to
Mhm.
be, in a way, consider them through a different eyes. I'm not too sure.
Yep.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely on the right track. So yeah, I mean, look, absolutely, there's a lot of overlap here between compassion and
Yeah.
empathy. The other thing I'm getting here with compassion, though, is in terms of sensitivity, right? Is like, let's say you were writing an essay about inequality. It would be being sensitive to points about things like crime, or about things like entrenched generational inequality. So aspects of a topic which might cause certain groups of people to be impacted by it more than others, or might lead to certain groups of people, um, being triggered by certain topics. Being cognizant of that in your discussion is super important. So, again, if we're talking about like these compassion, really, in the way that I've described it here, uh, it becomes, I think, even more important when you start drilling into more controversial topics or more hot button topics. All right, if you're writing an essay about something like religion, compassion is going to be super important. Empathy is going to be super important, because you might be coming at something from a certain perspective, but when an issue is really controversial, the people that disagree with you, there's going to be an inherent tension there, right? And in the same way as a doctor, where you're speaking to a patient and you're providing information to a patient that they don't really want to hear, there is an inherent tension in the room. There is an inherent tension that comes with that process of communication. And how you grapple with that and navigate your way through that is really important, not only as sort of a trail of yourself as a medical professional, but in section 2, it becomes a really important indication of how well you're able to navigate these really sensitive topics in a way which avoids upsetting or offending a group of people, but also at the same time not compromising on your own ability to deliver information in a really comprehensive manner. So compassion is really important. Being empathetic is really important. Number 3 here is openness. Okay. Emily, what do you think I mean by openness here?
In the essay, would it kind of be like if you're giving one point that's kind of probably more one-sided on what you think, would it then be kind of going to the other side and touching on how you could look at that from a different perspective?
Yes. So it's a derivative of empathy here, right? It's a derivative of this idea of considering things from different perspectives. But more specifically, openness is all about, as I've kind of put there, it's approaching essays with an attitude of I think this rather than I know this. Okay. So again, nowhere in the rubric that we looked at before, nowhere in the criteria that we looked at before, did ASA mention anything about level of expertise or level of knowledge, right? So they are fully aware of the fact that most of you guys sitting in the GAMSAT, just have a bachelor's degree. 90-ish% of people that sit the GAMSAT have a undergraduate degree, something related to healthcare or medical science. So whether it's a biomed degree or whether it's a, psychology degree or it's a pharmacy degree, 90% of people sitting in the GAMSAT don't really have any educational background on economics or politics or anything like this. So they're kind of walking into the dark. And I'm sure most of you guys probably feel that way when you're doing a lot of these essays. Like, okay, I'm writing an essay here about capitalism, but I'll be honest, I don't really know a lot about capitalism, right? I know a lot about democracy. I'm kind of walking in the dark. ASA is completely aware of that, right? And that's why you're not getting marked really on your expertise on a topic. Now, having knowledge and having sort of that background information is important to write a good essay, but you're not directly getting marked on that. You're not getting directly marked on how many economic frameworks you can cite and how many economists you know and things like that. It's not really what you're getting marked on. So if you try and write your essay with the attitude of this is what I know rather than this is what I think, you are going to naturally come across as not being open-minded. You're going to naturally come across as being closed-minded. You're going to come across as being a bit sheltered and almost a bit arrogant and narcissistic in your style of writing. All of which, remember, we think about section 2 as a test of character. Those are character traits that we do not want in doctors. These are character traits that we do not want in medical students, and these are characteristics that ASA does not want to see in you guys' writing. Okay, so there are a lot of easy tricks and things that you can do to just slightly tweak your writing to make it sit more in that tone of this is what I know rather than this is what I think rather than this is what I know, right? One of my favorite ways to do that is when you're writing an essay, you're writing a paragraph, you're making a point, you're making an insight. Instead of just saying it flatly, you can add in some level of measurement into it. So you can say something like, "It appears to me that capitalism is a destructive economic system," rather than capitalism is a destructive economic system, right? So the difference between those two sentences is if I just go straight out of the bat and say capitalism is a destructive economic system, that sounds like something I am communicating to you that I know for sure. But I'm saying from a place of confidence and I'm saying from a place of expertise. Now, I might have a PhD in economics. I might have no idea about economics. ASA has no idea about that. Okay. And that's why having that humility and openness in your writing is really important. Whereas if I come out and I say something like, well, it appears to me, based off what I've read or based off what I've seen or whatever it is, but it appears to me that capitalism is an increasingly destructive economic system. Just that tweak in phrasing, that tweak in language is making my writing come across as more humble, more open-minded, and befitting of the characteristics that we've been discussing for the last 5-10 minutes. Okay, so it's small tweaks like that, and we'll talk about like lots of different ways in which you can do that. There's a couple of examples in the coming slides that we'll look at as well that will show you that. But being open-minded and reflecting that openness in your writing is really, really important. Okay, so you want to write your essays. I'll say it one more time. You want to write essays sounding like you're talking about something you think rather than something you know. Okay, and also that comes back and links back to what I think Sienna said earlier when it comes to compassion, empathy, and that is that our opinions are formed by probably our upbringing in privileged situations, our upbringing in certain environments, and those are all going to shape how we view and look at certain things, right? That's our perspective, but that doesn't necessarily make them the right perspective. That doesn't absolutely make it the only perspective, and we need to be cognizant of that to realize that everyone has these different upbringings, everyone has these different environments, and therefore everyone comes at issues from a different place. And it's really important to recognize that. So that's openness. Okay. Number 4 here, emotional intelligence. How is your writing going to be interpreted? Okay. Oops. Let's go back. Manyanlan, so what do you think about this one? What do you think this is referring to, and how can we embed this into our writing?
I think just based on the definition on the ball is more like, since sometimes like when you read about a topic, you have like background knowledge, or like you have some sort of idea in your head, but how you put it out on the paper, because you put a sentence out there, it's more like you're writing to yourself than how other people are gonna perceive it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this point here, it's all about it's got less to do with your actual ideas and more to do with how you communicate those ideas, right? So if you take any message you want to convey to any person, right? Let's say, for example, I wanted to go to my parents and tell them to go to the gym, right? Because there's increasing evidence that as people get older, they need to do some form of strength exercise. They need to keep exercising to be healthy. And I've been reading about this, and I want to tell my parents to go to the gym, right? Now, there is 2 ways in which I can go to my parents and tell them to go to the gym, right? One way would be to do it in a very snarky, in a very ignorant way, in a very holier than thou way. So I might go to my mum and say, well, what are you doing sitting at home watching TV, right? Like, go get a gym membership, right? Like, you're a successful banker, you're a successful lawyer. Go get a gym membership and start lifting weights, right? Like, drinking all this tea and eating all these curries is not going to get you anywhere, right? Like, it's just going to lead you to an early grave. I could say that to them, but think about how that would be interpreted. How would someone, whether it's my parents or it's a friend or whoever it is I'm telling to go to the gym, because I've been at medical school reading about the importance of weightlifting, how would that be interpreted? Now, if you contrast that to a situation where I go, I sit down, I'm more cognizant, I'm more compassionate, empathetic, open-minded, and I sit down and I have a more gentle conversation with my parents, and I explain to them what I've been reading. I explain to them that it's coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of me wanting the best for them. It's coming from a place where, I want them to be healthy as they sort of, retire and they get older. Well, it's much more likely that my recommendation that they go to the gym is going to be taken seriously, and it's going to be taken more positively. Okay. Now, it's the same thing with your GAMSAT writing, is you could be making the exact same point, you could be making the exact same argument, but how you portray, how you put that together is really going to alter the way in which a marker or reader of the essay interprets what you're putting or what you're saying. Okay. The best example I can give you for this 4th point is essays on feminism. So I always love talking about this because one of your homework prompts is about gender, right? Not to spoil anything. It's not today's one, so it's coming at some point. And so, I've been running these classes for 9 sittings now, and I've read, probably over 100 homework essays on and just other essays on gender and feminism. And these essays tend to be both some of the best essays that I mark and some of the worst essays that I mark. The reason they're some of the best essays that I mark is because feminism and gender tends to be an issue that a lot of people are really, really passionate about. And passion often leads to great writing. Okay. Not just in GAMSAT, in almost any domain of life, passion leads to great writing. Okay. However, passion can also lead to the sort of blocking off of a lot of these qualities, including emotional intelligence. Okay. Because when you are passionate about something and you're really one-tracked about something and you're really, you believe really strongly in something, you can write about it or communicate about it in a way which feels polarizing or which doesn't really consider how that is going to be interpreted by someone else. So both the best essays on feminism and gender and the worst ones both tend to be written by really passionate female students writing about feminism. right? They're writing about the same thing, but they're sometimes scoring exceptionally highly with their homework essays and sometimes really poorly. And the ones that are done really poorly, the mistake they'll make is that they'll have some really good thoughts. They'll have a really great opinion. It's evident to me as a marker that they're well informed about this topic. They know a lot about feminism. They feel very strongly about feminism. But the consideration of how what they're writing is going to be interpreted by me, a male marker, kind of misses the mark there. And it's not as if I'm here as like the anti-feminist brigade officer. In many senses, I would consider myself a feminist as well. But any person that doesn't feel the exact same way as these students feel about these issues is going to feel somewhat polarized, attacked, alienated from the ideas offered in these essays. Thanks, Sienna. Take care. And so, for me, that becomes a really great case study of covering an idea on one hand in a way which is written exceptionally well, and on the other hand, written in a way which completely pisses off, polarizes, and annoys a marker, makes them feel attacked, makes them feel unheard, makes them feel ignored, and it's inevitably going to lead to a poor mark in the GAMSAT. Okay. So you need to be cognizant of how what you're writing is going to be interpreted, and specifically how it's going to be interpreted by like the opposite demographic of what you're writing to. So if you're writing an essay as a, really passionate sort of feminist writing this essay, okay, well, how is your essay then going to be interpreted by someone who, is old, male, not vocally a feminist? Is your essay gonna ring true with them, or is it gonna resonate with them, or is it gonna just polarize them? Okay, or if you're writing an essay and you're being really, in one of your examples, in one of the paragraphs, you're being really critical of Israel as a in a geopolitical sort of sense analytically. Well, if your marker is a immigrant from Israel who's arrived 3 years ago, who's a very passionate Israeli, how is that going to sit with them, right? Or vice versa. If you're criticizing the Iranian regime, or you're criticizing Gaza or whatever, how is that going to fare with someone that's sort of on the other side of that debate? And what we want to do is write our essays, offer insight in a way where it doesn't really matter whether someone agrees or disagrees with me. They're still going to be able to recognize what I'm saying. They're going to feel heard and understood, but they're also going to be able to appreciate the insight that I'm offering at the same time. So that's really, really important. Okay. The fifth one here is introspection. Okay. So why do you think what you think? Laura, what do you think is the importance of considering our reasons for our opinions, our reasons for why we think what we think in our essays?
Well, I think going back to what we were talking about before, like being self-aware in your writing and understanding why you may feel certain emotions. I don't know if this is totally on the right path, but reflecting back on your own experiences in it. I think just gaining a deeper understanding of your own self.
Yeah. So, like, again, it wraps around back to sort of something we spoke about earlier today, which is we all come from various backgrounds, we all come from various upbringings, we all come from various sort of belief systems, and all of that is going to shape what we think, right? So to sort of approach an issue and just assume that what we think is absolutely objectively correct is to ignore the ways in which our upbringing and all those factors shape what we think, shape our opinions, right? So, Laura, I'm just going to put you on the spot here. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, but just think about an opinion you have about anything related to economics, politics, sociology. It can be super controversial. It can be something super basic. Just, it could be something like capitalism or democracy. It could be anything about the Australian national state, anything you want. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it.
That money doesn't bring you happiness. Just a really
Okay, sure, that's fine. That's fine. That perfectly works for what we're doing here. So, money doesn't bring you happiness. Okay, now I want you to critically self-evaluate that insight that you've arrived at, and you can sort of share as much of this as you want. But what is it about anything in the 20, 25, 30, I'm not sure how old you are, obviously, but across your entire life, what is it that has led you to having that opinion?
I think just personally what I've experienced, that people around me,
Mhm.
that in
So I'll
ways
give you a
money,
really good circumstance there would be, I'm assuming you've grown up in Australia.
yes.
Okay, so growing up in Australia being, relatively speaking, one of the richest countries in the world. Okay. Um, Pretty much everyone in Australia, relatively on a global scale, is extremely wealthy, right? And so there's a lot of abundance of wealth, abundance of money, relatively on a global scale. And so when you're exposed to that, so much, um, you start to notice that there's more than money that's important. There's more than money that goes towards happiness. Now, can you think of someone that might disagree with you, and what the differences in their upbringing or sort of background might be? So why might someone think that money is key to happiness?
Maybe someone who hasn't come from an as fortunate background and has
Yep,
maybe obtained wealth and then later on maybe can see the benefit and that bringing happiness.
absolutely. So someone from a background where they didn't have an abundance of money. So someone from a third world country or someone that grew up in a developing nation, who exposed themselves and lived a life of severe poverty or impoverization, and then maybe they've experienced that like sudden surge of cash and money, and they've noticed, okay, well, actually there is a big change that happens there. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you're wrong, that doesn't mean that they're wrong, that doesn't mean that you're right, or it doesn't mean that they're right. It just means that you're coming at these issues from different positions, and those positions are derived from your personal background, your personal upbringing, etc. The key thing here, though, is you have to be cognizant of why you have that opinion, right? So if you write a whole essay about why money doesn't bring you happiness, at some point in that essay, I'd want to see a consideration or an acknowledgement of the fact that you're probably arriving at that opinion because of XYZ, right? If you write a whole essay about why money doesn't bring you happiness and you don't recognize that, you're missing this quality of introspection, because you're missing this point or this significance of acknowledging why that part of that piece of the puzzle is missing. And without that piece of the puzzle, it doesn't click as well. Whereas if you can provide that introspection in your discussion, it makes everything click a lot nicely together. Okay. So the five ones there in black, there's obviously three in gray below, but the five in black there are character traits, right? They're specifically to do with the content of what you're talking about. The next three are all to do with your writing. These are writing qualities. They still go into speaking to character, and they still go, probably equally as important for section 2. But these are more writing techniques. So we've got clarity, precision, insight. Okay, and I'll just for the sake of time, I'll go through these three myself. So clarity, number one, being able to prioritize being clear and understandable above all else. And this is where often, you know, the intention to make your section 2 essays sound really smart and fancy and intelligent actually ends up compromising clarity. Okay, because a lot of the time people will try and throw in those big words or try and throw in those big terms, and because they're not confident with it, because they're doing it in a forceful way, the essay doesn't read as well. And if your essay doesn't read well, it's impossible for any marker to really reward you for the content that you're talking about, because it's unclear. Okay. Now, hopefully we can all acknowledge the importance of being clear in communication for any medical professional, whether it is communicating with a patient and needing to be clear about the medications that they need to take or the treatment regime that you're offering them, whether it is about delivering bad news about months of a patient to live and being clear and making sure they understand what you're saying, or whether it's communicating with fellow medical professionals. Maybe it's talking to other doctors during a surgery. Maybe it's talking to nurses and making sure they're understanding what it is that you need them to do in the management of a patient. Okay, but clarity is really important. You can have all the compassion, empathy, openness, emotional intelligence, introspection, but if none of that is understandable to the marker, it's going to go unrewarded. So you have to be clear in what you say. I always say that I would much rather you guys write your essays with the vocabulary of a 10-year-old, but being super clear, than try and sprinkle in these big words and end up just jumbling everything up, right? So start with clarity, and the more you read, the more you learn, the more you sort of expose yourself to ideas, your vocabulary will naturally build up. It will naturally grow. And if your vocabulary is naturally growing, it will naturally weave itself into your writing in a way which maintains clarity. If you're artificially trying to inject bigger words that don't usually form part of your vernacular, it's going to be very evident in an essay because it will severely sacrifice the clarity and the sort of flow of everything. So within clarity comes things like flow and coherency and all those things. They come into this point of clarity. Number two here in terms of writing techniques or qualities is precision. Okay, so specificity and precision, go hand in hand here. Everything, the name of the game in section 2, to improve your analysis, to improve the depth of thought, is to be more precise. You can never be too precise. You can never be too specific. And probably the most common feedback that, when I'm marking homework essays and I'm highlighting a piece of text and I click comment, the most common thing I'm writing in those comment boxes is be more specific or vague, right? Because there's always an opportunity to go more specific. If you're writing an essay, a whole 32.5-minute essay about capitalism, that is too vague, right? Because capitalism exists in many forms. Capitalism differs depending on where you exist in the world. Capitalism is really, honestly, a spectrum, right? So, you might have capitalism here and socialism here. It isn't as if they exist sort of separately or sort of mutually exclusively. They exist almost on a spectrum, right? So you can have a widely capitalist economy with a certain degree of taxation, a certain degree of socialization, right? And so you need to be more specific about what type of capitalism are we talking about, or where on the spectrum are we talking? Are we talking about capitalism in America? Are we talking about capitalism in Australia? Because they differ a lot. Are we talking about capitalism in the context of its effects on inequality, or are we talking about capitalism in terms of its effects on growing prosperity? Are we talking about capitalism in the way that it brings people out of poverty in third world nations, or are we talking about capitalism in the sense of how it's corrupting democracy? There's all these different ways in which you can approach capitalism, and they're all more specific versions of that central theme of capitalism. But when I read an essay and the first sentence is, throughout history, capitalism has continued to be a immensely important economic system. That is, first of all, the most generic topic sentence, first sentence of an essay you can have. But it's also, honestly, the first sentence in like 75 to 80% of essays that I read is, throughout history, XYZ, or over time, or recently, XYZ. You need to start off, and this is getting a little bit out of scope for what we're covering today. We'll cover this next week and the week after. But your first sentence of the essay has to be punchy, has to be a hook, has to be something engaging. If you start off with, across time, money has been super important, and capitalism has been a derivative of that, whatever. It's just very generic. It's very boring. It's putting your marker to sleep. Okay. But precision is really important. The deeper you go in your analysis, the better, right? So what I often see in essays as well is people will write laterally rather than go deeper, right? So if you're talking about capitalism in an essay, a weak essay will maybe explore 5 different components of capitalism. Rather than exploring 5 different components of capitalism in a 32.5-minute essay, which you can do the maths on that, that's like 5 to 6 minutes on each component of capitalism. There's only so much depth you can go into, in 5 minutes of discussion. Rather than doing that, if you focus your essay on one component of that capitalist framework and you go 30 minutes deep into it, your essay is going to be exponentially better. So rather than moving laterally, move deeper with your analysis. Okay, and that's always done through precision and specificity. Our last quality here is insight. So what do you have to say? Now, you can take all 7 of the previous qualities into account. If your essay doesn't say anything, it doesn't make a statement, doesn't offer a stance, doesn't offer an opinion, it's a waste of space. Okay, why are you writing? Why do people write? Why do people put thoughts to paper? Why do people do a podcast? Why do people make YouTube videos? Why do people make Instagram videos? there's always a purpose, and it's to deliver some insight. Sometimes it's a educational insight, sometimes it's and persuasive insight, whatever it is. Your essays have to have some purpose. They have to have some insight. They have to have something to say, right? If you go to the doctor and you say, "Hey, doctor, there's a lump on my neck and I'm a bit worried about it," and your doctor spends 10 minutes talking to you about the physiology about necks and the physiology about pimples and the physiology about lumps, but they don't give you any insight, they don't tell you what's going on, you're going to walk out of that consultation being none the wiser as to what's going on with you. You need the doctor to provide you some insight, okay? And so in section 2, you need to provide that insight as well. And I would encourage you to be brave with the insights you provide, and to avoid zigging where everyone else is zigging, right? So if everyone's walking left, you can walk left, but maybe walk left backwards, or maybe skip left rather than walking left, right? And if you're brave, if everyone's walking left, you walk right, or you go straight, okay? That's where the insight's going to come from, okay? If everyone's walking left and you also walk left, you're just going to get lost in a sort of wide pack of mediocrity, and your essay is just not really going to say a lot, okay? So if everyone's writing an essay about how and why capitalism makes inequality worse, and that's the whole premise of your essay, I'm sorry to say, everyone's writing about that. And if you write about that, there's not a lot of insight you're going to be able to offer. If you take a spin on that and you maybe talk about how capitalism creates inequality, but actually inequality is a fundamental component of a well-functioning democracy and a well-functioning economy, well, now all of a sudden, everyone's gone left and you've gone right, okay? And before you even get into the analysis, before you even get into your discussion, you've got the marker's attention. You've got them sitting up straight and thinking, okay, well, I haven't read this before. This is a bit different. Okay. So these are your 8 qualities. I want you guys to really be thinking about these when you're writing essays. No, you're not always going to be able to embed all 8 of these at the same time, and maybe not even all 8 of these into a single essay, but they should serve as a background foundational framework that you can rely upon and draw upon as you write your essays. And the more of this that you can kind of drill into, the better your writing's going to be. Okay. Any questions?